have to run for the office where you have a personal platform.
Pam Keith is a long shot in the U.S. Senate race, but she's got the Miami Herald's endorsement, and she could get yours. She will join us live.
She doesn't want to come out and debate any of the issues or defend her record.
Tim Canova, considered a long shot for Congress against longtime incumbent Debbie Wasserman Schultz, has a serious following among progressives. He is with us today.
What do you think the other commissioners are doing? They're all asking for their wish list.
A vice mayor confronted with a recording of his own voice talking about taking gifts from a big developer. It is just one of the topics we'll take to the roundtable.
Good morning and welcome aboard the final election edition before the primary.
And I'm glad you're here this morning. Glad that Glenna is back with us after a week off. We have two first-time candidates for Congress who are mounting impressive campaigns against veterans.
Coming up, candidate for U.S. Senate Pam Keith, a lawyer and a former naval officer running in the Democratic primary.
First, the race to be the Democratic nominee for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 23rd Congressional District. That's the one that stretches from Weston down through Aventura all the way down to parts of Miami Beach. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has represented the district for the last 12 years. She was also chair of the Democratic National Committee for the last 5 years, but lost that job in July after leaked emails showed that DNC staffers favored Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders.
Tim Canova was endorsed by Bernie Sanders. He is a law professor at Nova Southeastern University, and he is running for elected office for the first time. And we invited the Congresswoman, of course, to join us this morning, but she declined. And so we say welcome, Tim Canova. Thanks for being here this morning.
It's very nice to be here. Thank
you so glad you are here. All right, let's begin with sort of the tough question. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been in Congress for 12 years, has seniority. Congress runs on seniority. She is close to the leadership. She's very close to Hillary Clinton, who might be the next president. Those are compelling reasons to vote for her. What are the compelling reasons to vote for you?
Well, she has not used her seniority very well to help the district in any way. And I don't say that lightly. I got involved in this campaign last summer working for the Citizens Trade Campaign, lobbying against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And what we've discovered is on issue after issue, she's been siding with very large corporate interests and Wall Street banks and not representing the people of South Florida.
Well, which interests particularly do you think that she has been partial to or has done their bidding?
Well, there's a long list. Predatory payday lenders was one of the first issues that we were campaigning about. Private prisons. She's taken money from the largest private prison companies in the world. The GEO Group and the Correction Corporations of America. And she supported a private detention center, a proposal for an immigration detention center that was privatized right here in our own district of Southwest Ranches.
We can talk all about in depth of those issues, but really anyone who's following your campaign, you've really built your campaign on this assertion that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has taken money from big corporations and then voted for them, indicating some kind of quid pro quo. But do you have any evidence that there has been a quid pro quo?
You know, I think this is what ordinary citizens find frustrating. We're not going to have a corporate political action committee that's going to hand a check to a member of Congress and say, now you're going to vote our way and it's going to be caught on film. But people have eyes and they can see what's happening. 60 Minutes had an episode not too long ago that members of Congress, when they're running for their re-elections, how do they raise their money? They spend 30 hours a week in call centers dialing for dollars. Who are they dialing? They're dialing wealthy folks, CEOs of corporations, 30 hours a week in, week out. It starts to change somebody's worldview away from ordinary folks. And I know this as a professor. I've been teaching for years. I see my students here in South Florida who are struggling to make it. They're going deeply in debt and paying high interest rates, and they're graduating into a lousy job market. They're not getting any answers from Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Well, there are plenty of flaws in the political system. That's granted to you. Let me go back to something when you did have one debate with Representative Wasserman Schultz. She and the moderators cited something on your website that said that you supported disarmament in the Middle East.
Yes.
And the Congresswoman said, all right, well, Israel's in the Middle East, so do you support disarmament of Israel?
That's right. And if they had read the sentence previously to what they cited, they would have said, they would have seen that I was saying that Hamas and Hezbollah were the greatest threats to Israel, And in that context, it was clear that what I was talking about was arms reduction for Israel's hostile neighbors. I don't bow to anyone in the defense of Israel. I've lived in Israel, unlike Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I lived for many months on a kibbutz. I traveled around that region, and not just Israel, but also some of its neighbors. And I have a better understanding of what the problems are in that region. When Saudi Arabia has the 4th largest military budget in the world, and Iran is given a windfall of $100 billion for signing an agreement, that nuclear deal, that is making the region much more hostile to Israel and much more dangerous to Israel.
Well, as long as we're talking about Israel, CD23 is a congressional district that is heavily Jewish. Israel is a huge issue. So let's just stay there for one moment.
Sure.
Also on your website, and you have said that you favor a 2-state solution and Israel has to make compromises.
No,
what does that mean?
I
What
never
does
said.
compromise mean?
I never said Israel has to make compromises. I said I foresaw that a 2-state solution would probably require compromise. And isn't that a truism? You know, any kind of an agreement requires compromises from each side, and it's up to the Israelis and the Palestinians to determine which compromises are appropriate.
Well, detailed compromises, does that mean compromise on borders? Does that mean compromise on settlements? What kind
You know,
of
I've spent enough time in Israel studying the situation in Israel, actually. The last 2 times I was there were academic fellowships, that I'll tell you there are all kinds of possible compromises that have been on the table in the past, including land swaps. I don't have an opinion on what the proper compromise is. That should be up to the Israelis and the Palestinians.
You mentioned the Iran nuclear deal. I remember because I covered it, that Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz agonized publicly over that deal. Should I vote for it? Should I vote against it? And in the end, she voted for it.
That's right.
Now, you have been asked about this, and you have, frankly, it appears kind of waffled. You said you were against it, then you were for it.
If I may interject,
So,
I'll say early in my campaign, I was asked how I would have voted for it, and I said I would need to study it further.
Okay.
It would be hard to hypothetically know how I would have voted when I was not even a member of Congress.
Right. Well,
Since
do you
then,
think,
I have studied.
retrospect,
Since
what do you
then, I
think
have
now?
studied it plenty, and I think it was not a good deal. And there are a lot of Democrats here in Florida's congressional delegation who voted against it. Right. And knowing what I know now, I would not have voted for the deal.
Okay. Bernie Sanders, he appointed you, in fact, to a committee, and you have worked closely. You're politically in sync with him, and he helped you raise an amazing amount of money for this race, more than $3 million, much of it in small contributions. And yet, Senator Sanders did not come down here to campaign for you. Why didn't he come down?
Well, I'll say this, that we raised over $1 million even before Bernie Sanders endorsed us. So this campaign had legs well before the endorsement. I can't speak for Bernie Sanders why he wouldn't have come down here. That's up to him. I will note that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has brought a string of dignitaries here, political insiders, who campaigned for her. They don't want to campaign too publicly because she's the most unpopular Democrat in the country right now. And she's also had a super PAC that's spending almost $1 million on ad buys for her. Take a look at the super PAC, the Patriot Majority PAC. They are now going into the mud, coming out with these kinds of ads. They show me holding cash. That's a photograph of me from Century Village, where I'm not holding cash.
Yeah, it's been photoshopped.
Okay?
Yeah,
it's been photoshopped.
Yeah.
And the Patriot Majority PAC, well, it's funded by a billionaire hedge fund manager who's got a hedge fund offshore in the Virgin Islands that has $100 million in investments in energy, which might explain why Debbie Wasserman Schultz flip-flopped herself on whether she was for fracking or a ban on fracking.
You know, I'm going to ask you something I asked a little earlier before we went on the air. What if a super PAC was so supportive of you, they wanted to fund you? What would you say?
I've made it very clear from the very beginning, from the day one, that I would not take a penny from any corporate interest. And that means any corporate political action committee. And if there was a corporate-funded super PAC, I would tell them, please, no thank you. That hypothetical is really far-fetched. With the agenda that I have, it's hard to imagine any corporate interest wanting to back me at all. And that's the differences between Wasserman Schultz and myself. She's been swimming in corporate money. In fact, all the big sugar and big agricultural interests that brought us this dirty water up around Stewart.
I love when guests bring props.
Well, I'm a professor, you know, you've got to expect it. Exactly.
What is that?
That is water from Stewart, from the St. Lucie River. And if you fell in that water, you'd probably have liver damage in no time at all.
And how is she responsible for
I'll tell you
this awful water?
The Miami Herald had a piece not long ago that over the last 22 years, the big sugar companies have donated $57 million to politicians in both political parties. Wasserman Schultz is one of her biggest contributors. You take a look at what's happened in Okeechobee. Agricultural runoff from sugar, but also from non-sugar farming interests.
Dairy farms and others.
And the water has not been able to drain naturally into the Everglades.
And isn't that a lot of state policies really promote that?
I'll tell you, there's
issue?
a Florida Congressman, Clausen, who has a bill for the Interior Department to exercise its powers of eminent domain to take over those sugar farms, to convert it to marshland, which was the former Governor Charlie Crist plan.
That was his plan. All right, before we run out of time, I want to ask you about Social Security, because you have really hit this hard, and you say it should be expanded.
Absolutely.
All right, so how much should it be expanded by, and who's going to pay for it?
Well, I'll tell you, you could raise the limit on taxing Social Security, right? There's $118,000. Anyone above that
doesn't. Payroll tax.
Exactly. So that should be lifted completely, and that would help pay for a lot of it.
Completely? I mean, not stop at 125 or 130 or?
Completely. If you're making $1 billion a year, you should be paying right up until that towards the Social Security tax. I firmly believe that. You know, the billionaire class, the CEOs have done very well. The federal government has helped them a lot in recent years. You take a look at what happened after the 2008 financial collapse. The first 2 years after that collapse, the Federal Reserve stepped in and made $29 trillion in low-interest loans. And I mean 0.25% to the same big banks that created the crisis. That helps pump up the stock market. That helps protect the wealth of this class. They can at least pay into Social Security.
All right, that's going to be the final word. We have many more words we could have gotten to, but Tim Canova, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
And congrats on a very, I think, impressive campaign against an entrenched incumbent.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Up next, the political newcomer running to unseat Senator Marco Rubio, but first she has to beat 2 incumbent congressmen for the Democratic nomination. Pam Keith is in the hot seat next.
In the race for Florida's U.S. Senate seat, incumbent Marco Rubio is being challenged in the Republican primary by a home builder from Bradenton named Carlos Baruth.
And on the Democratic side, Congressman Patrick Murphy and Alan Grayson both are running hard, but face questions both about their ethical records. First-time candidate Pam Keith is taking them both on. She is a Miami-based labor lawyer and Navy veteran running her first campaign on an impressive military and professional record. And we welcome Pam Keith this morning to our studios.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so glad you're here. I saw Patrick Murphy earlier in the week. I said, come on down and sit with Pam Keith, and he's not doing any debates, and we regret that, and same for Alan Grayson. So what is the main theme of your debate? What is of your candidacy?
I think everybody out there, it doesn't seem to matter what side of the aisle they are on, is looking for new voices, fresh faces, new solutions. Most of the talking points on either side of the aisle have been repeated over and over again. And we've had too much politics that lacks substance and are really about attacking other candidates. And so I am a person who's lived a very interesting life. I've been a lot of places. I've served in the military.
You're the daughter of diplomats.
Yeah, and I have a global worldview. I'm a lawyer, obviously. I've studied the law. And so I have these ideas, these solutions that I wanted to get out to the public sphere. And that's what I've been doing over the last 22 months.
You know, you have quite the schedule. I've been reading where you're crisscrossing the state. And I will say we're very proud to have done your first television interview last month. And since then, I know that anecdotally speaking, people who meet you and listen to, obviously, you're intelligent, obviously you're experienced in many ways, and are kind of wowed by you, but still you're polling in the single digits, and you've had a rough ride trying to attract funding. Why is that? Why is this campaign not getting that kind of traction?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. You don't poll well if you're not included in the poll. And there are many polls that have just chosen not to include my name.
Is that right?
So that's part of it. But also, I think people need to understand the kinds of barriers to entry that are put before new candidates. When you're trying to raise money, you pick up the phone, you call people and say, hey, please give me money. And they say, well, I've never heard of you. Then you go to the media and they say, hey, media, please write about me so people know about me. And they say, oh, you have no money. And that cycle pushes new voices out. And what's interesting about our politics is that candidates who already have a lot of money trespass through that because A, the media Canada takes them seriously off the bat because they're considered competitive because they have money. And there's just sort of this love of the story of, oh, well, this wealthy businessman or this wealthy so-and-so can now play. But I think the reality is money is not a qualification.
Are you talking about Patrick Murphy, tacitly speaking?
Well, and not just him. I mean, if you look at Carlos Baraf, you know, he got into the race, and what was his principal qualification was the belief that he could bring so much money into the game. Yeah. But he didn't run a good campaign,
yeah.
You know?
All right, Ms. Keith, if I can, let's talk. I want to ask you about the Middle East. You were, I see, at one point stationed in Bahrain. You ran the JAG office, Judge Advocate General Corps, in the Navy there. So you have boots on the ground experience in the Middle East. When you look at United States policy in Syria over the last couple of years, generally speaking, it's not a good idea to draw a line in the sand, a red line, and say, don't cross this, Assad, but Assad of Syria did cross it. And there really were no consequences, were there?
There really weren't. And the sands shift so dramatically, so quickly in that part of the world. And part of it is that when you draw that line and say, okay, we're going to do this, you realize that it can jeopardize other things that you're trying to do very quickly. Our position on the removal of Assad in the first place, where we said Assad has to go and that's our decision to make, I think was ham-fisted. Because now when we are desperately in need of a coordinated, cohesive ground force to take land from ISIS, the best placed army to do that is the Egyptian ground forces. They are well trained, they're well provisioned, they have all the indicias of command and control, they're Arab and they're Sunni. That is the right force to take land and hold land from ISIS, but we can't bring al-Sisi to the table because he has an allegiance with Assad. If we were to look at it more in a downstream look, we would have probably taken a more gentle approach about what the right answer in terms of leadership in Syria would be if we had been a little bit more diplomatic about that.
On domestic issues, now you're a labor attorney. You have a perch from which to look at labor relations. Give us your take on things like raising the minimum wage, on Social Security, on labor relations.
I will tell you that I am a supporter of a $15 minimum wage. I think that just catches up to the inflation that has existed since the last minimum wage increase. But I also tell people that we can't, we have data now. We have cities, we have states that have raised the minimum wage, and there's data to prove that it does not cause a whole bunch of businesses to go out of business or create dramatic inflation. You can't just say that you think that's going to happen theoretically anymore. We now have data to prove that that doesn't really happen. And what does happen is people get money in their hands to actually spend in the economy. As for labor relations, I think we need to have a fresh approach to labor relations and labor in general. Although the AFL-CIO didn't really give me much oxygen, I will tell you that I have ideas about revitalizing that movement because millennial workers are not interested in working for the same employer for 30 years. They're not interested in seniority like that. So labor has to have a value proposition for young workers. And I say, hey, how about you have this affiliate relationship with young workers where they can buy into your health and welfare plans, which, by the way, are heavily underfunded. They can get prevailing wage information. They can get mentoring, certifications. And that's a way of getting a new revenue stream into labor.
You are obviously a proud veteran, and I'm going to assume that you get medical treatment through the Veterans Administration, wherever you are. But there are so many complaints from veterans that they must wait long periods to get treated by a doctor, especially a specialist. What would you do in the Senate to fix the VA?
I'm so glad you asked me that question because I've been talking about it on the campaign trail everywhere. I have two main ideas in this area. Number one, we have to change how we fund a VA. VA is funded out of domestic discretionary spending, and it's not part of the military budget. But there's no correlation between troop levels and VA funding. And so what I'm saying is that every time we sign up a new service member, money should be cut at that time for that VA care so that it's sequestered over to the VA. It's waiting for them when they come out. So we're not constantly dealing with underfunding of the VA. The second thing is you have to understand the claim process. When you put in a claim, it is incumbent upon the veteran to prove every aspect of their claim. So if you just got out of the military, that might be fairly easy. But let's say you were jumping out of airplanes when you were 19 in Vietnam, and now you're in your late 60s. You have to reconstruct your service, where you were, what training you got. You have to get buddy affidavits. This all is on the veteran. My proposal is to change the regulatory scheme to make the VA have the burden of proof to disprove a veteran's claim within 90 days. And if the VA cannot disprove the claim in 90 days, then it must pay it and keep moving. We have to keep in mind that veterans are people of honor. And if they say that they have a legitimate claim, we should be giving them the benefit of the doubt.
You know, in the short time we have left, when we spoke for the first time, I had asked you, how does race and gender define you? And I think that's kind of a woman question that we ask each other sometimes. And you said to me, my identity first. You acknowledge that that shapes what you are. Your identity first is an American.
Yes.
So explain to me that you have accused now an Orlando television station of racism and sexism because they did not include you in a debate.
Right.
How did that work?
Well, Glenna, you have to understand that I wasn't talking about racism and sexism to me. I was talking about racism and sexism to the voters, because an African-American voter might have a particular interest in seeing an African-American candidate. It's not only insensitive, it's tone deaf not to recognize that. A woman voter might have a particular interest in a woman candidate. I'm the only woman running that's appearing on the ballot in any of the primaries. As a woman voter, it would offend me to vote first and find out later that there was a viable female candidate. So it wasn't that it was just disrespectful of me. Their job is not to handicap the race. Their job is to inform the voters of their choices. And that's really what I was referring to.
Which kind of brings us full circle to what we started the conversation with.
And also I want to point out that in a minute, one of the Roundtable members here, somebody with whom we have such high regard, Dr. Marvin Dunn, a couple of months ago said, my candidate is Pam Keith.
Yes.
So Dr. Dunn was promoting you and your candidacy a couple of months ago.
Great to have you here.
Great to have you come in. Thank you very much.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
coming up, and we are going to take this discussion about the Senate race and so much more to the Powerhouse Roundtable. Stay with us. Live in our studio this morning, it is time once again for our roundtable. Boy, we have a great one for you today. Dr. Marvin Dunn is a psychologist, taught for many years at FIU, also prolific writer. His new book is called A History of Florida Through Black Eyes, available on Amazon. Thank you.
Rosemary O'Hara is the editorial page editor of the Sun Sentinel and a regular here on the Roundtable. And of course, a regular Mark Caputo is the Florida correspondent for Politico, the website for all things political. And he writes the Politico Florida Playbook, which shows up in ours and your email every morning.
Yeah, I read it about 7 o'clock every morning. And I don't know what time you get up to file it, but...
all hours.
All hours. Okay. Well, welcome all. Glad to have you here. Dr. Dunn, Marvin, let me begin with you, not because you're African American, but partly because you are. But here we have Donald Trump this week saying, what do you have to lose? African American voters, Hispanic voters. I'm your guy, and Hillary Clinton is a bigot, and vote for me. What did you think when you heard him say that?
I thought it was stupid. I thought it was stupid. He doesn't get to define what bigotry is. A bigot, a racial bigot, is a person who hates or has a negative view of black people. To say that about Hillary Clinton is ridiculous. She's married to Bill Clinton, who was the first black president of the United States. To black folks, Bill was, you know, and Hillary Clinton is, I think, easily able to argue for all of her adult life. She's been working with minority communities, helping people in need. So it was a very, very ill-informed thing to say, but it was not the first ill-informed thing that he said. I took a look at black unemployment, for example. He said, you have no jobs. Well, we do have jobs.
Yeah, 58%, I think he said, unemployment among African-American youth.
Which is false. Right. Exactly.
which is
58% unemployment across the board is what he said. It's false.
Yeah.
Right, but unemployment among African Americans has dropped from about 15% in 2011 to about 8% now. So to dismiss the fact that we have had job growth for minority group members is just not true. Also, the fact that he said we have no homes. Well, 62% of African Americans own their own homes. So I think Trump is very ill-informed about the black community, in no position to accuse anybody of bigotry, particularly when his own family fortune was built upon racial discrimination.
Yeah, and there's a front-page article in today's New York Times about how his apartment holdings, he and his family holdings, discriminated against African Americans.
When you talk to African American voters, people, citizens, what you hear time and again is what Marvin Dunn said. And if you look at what Trump was saying, not as an effort to reach out to black voters, but to reach out to white voters for their perceptions of how blacks are, that I think is really what's at play here for Donald Trump.
And is that what happened when he tweeted out after a horrific shooting in Chicago and Dwayne Wade's relative was murdered, and he seemed to take the opportunity to say, see what happened, vote for me? That's the pattern, isn't it?
Where I think his previous outreach that we just discussed was actually an effort to kind of attract more voters. I just think this was just ridiculous.
Pandering.
Yes, no, it's just ridiculous Donald Trump saying
I don't
ridiculous
even think
things.
he knew what he was saying. In an interview with Anderson Cooper, he was asking him, so you think she hates black people? Well, she hasn't done anything for him, but you think she really hates him? Well, I think she's lazy. So he went from saying that she was bigoted to saying she was lazy. And I really think he just needed a hot word to counter the word of racist that's been applied to him.
And if I may say, I read there was a speech that the Trump campaign sent out. He ad-libbed a good deal, but that line with bigot in it was in that speech. That was not ad-libbed. That wasn't improvised.
Well, it's just, again, I think that's just part of his effort to kind of, as she said, counteract this. And also, it's not necessarily to reach out to black voters as much as to reassure white voters, like, look, you can trust me on this issue. Just in fairness here, I think we should also discuss the Associated Press last week did quite a barn burner on Hillary Clinton's foundation donors.
And describe for anybody who wasn't familiar what the AP reported, because it was,
they're essentially reporting, and I don't want to put words in the AP writers' mouths, essentially what looks like a pay-for-play or pay-for-access scheme in which donors to the foundation were able to get meetings with Clinton. Now, the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton campaign has pushed back on this.
What it said was more than 150 non-government officials had met with her, and of that number, something like 84 had been huge contributors. They or an organization they were part of paid millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation. I mean, it just doesn't pass the smell test.
Correct, and I think that's one of the problems that Democrats have, is they always talk about Citizens United, and oh, money is corrupting politics, and big money is bad. But then their own candidate is involved in a situation where big money is changing hands, and they're saying, oh, nothing to see here.
But you see, to me, Donald Trump is the last person to raise any question about money when he won't even show his own income tax returns. He won't even show those that were completed years ago that are not now subject to auditing. So he is in no position to accuse Hillary Clinton of any pay-to-play scheme when we don't know who he's paid to play.
Yeah. But it wasn't even him that was pointing this out. It was journalists who said, half of the non-government people who visit her are people who've given big bucks to the foundation. The foundation does good work. Yes, it's done a lot of good work in Africa, and I would hate to see it go away. But she is just terrible at answering her critics. That she did have this volume of people, a special status for those who gave money, and this whole business about her not taking questions or doing a press conference. She is in such a bubble that she had a terrible week too.
Well, and that's just a great point. Is Donald Trump won't release his tax returns. Hillary Clinton won't even take a question at a press conference. So like 267, 9 days, something like that. We're looking at either one of these candidates has a great dislike for a free press.
But if you've got Trump self-destructing every day, why hold a press conference? Why subject yourself to questions?
Exactly.
Trump is managing to win win the campaign for you.
Because you want somebody who's going to be your president to be accessible.
Of course.
At least President Obama, and I'm an miss President Obama because he at least held press conferences and made himself available. She has been in such a cocoon that and there is a disdain for a free press that, you know, she has questions that she needs to answer to.
I agree.
But I do agree with Marvin. If your enemy is busy destroying himself, do nothing.
Well,
and that's
on
what
the
she's
other
doing.
hand,
Yeah.
he is now waffling on immigration. Even Ann Coulter is upset with him.
No, I think he's back to being rather far right on the issue now.
all
If you
right.
saw
Now,
the Sean Hannity
hard
interview with
line,
him last
okay.
night.
Yeah,
All right.
he's
well,
not softening.
God bless Sean Hannity.
Yeah, they still
The
got to
only
leave and
person
come back.
he
You
talks
never,
to.
you know, they
All
still
right,
got to leave
hold
and come
on.
back.
Coming up, more of the Roundtable, and we're going to take on the case of the Vice Mayor of Hallandale Beach, heard on tape talking about gifts from a big developer. Bob Norman has that story.
You're taking bribes, and you got the to open your mouth and you accuse other people?
The chaos that erupted at this week's Hallandale Beach Commission meeting was fallout from a Local 10 News investigation into the vice mayor's ethics and actions. The Broward State Attorney is now investigating what sounds like recorded evidence that Bill Julian agreed to accept gifts and favors from a developer before voting for its project.
Julian appeared to admit it much to Local 10's Bob Norman, who confronted him with his own recorded words.
That's all new to me. This has never happened before.
Hallandale Beach Vice Mayor Bill Julian appears shell-shocked.
300 people out in the street for you when you went for office.
He just heard a recording of his own voice, apparently talking about favors in exchange for his vote to approve a massive development at his city's Diplomat Golf Resort.
What they don't know is they're buying the food bank a freaking van that I couldn't tell everybody.
Including a gift for his pet charity, the Hallandale Food Pantry, and worse, a promise of 300 campaign workers to help him get reelected on November the 8th.
Orchesky told me, don't worry, before this, don't worry, we'll have 300 people out in the street for you when you run for office. I don't want to see that.
Faced with his own words, the vice mayor admitted that he'd agreed to accept those gifts during negotiations at City Hall with developer Michael Myers and diplomat attorney Debbie Orchesky prior to his vote, and he confirmed that Orchesky offered him the campaign workers.
Who brought up the gifts?
I brought up the van.
Where did the 300 campaign workers come in? She just said it to you?
Yeah, make me feel good that I got volunteers coming. I don't know. My opinion was, oh yeah, well, I'm going to need them. You know, thanks, I'm going to need them. But that's not going to happen.
You're taking these secret gifts for the food bank and for your campaign before a vote.
What do you think the other commissioners are doing? They're all asking for their wish list.
Are these developers and these lobbyists giving all of the politicians these kind of gifts underneath the table?
This is the first I've ever had somebody say, look, we're going to help you with people. And I'm thinking, well, great, you know.
But isn't that illegal for you to say that?
I don't know. I don't know if it's illegal. I don't know.
A lot of people have reached out to me subsequent to your two broadcasts and said, what's going on?
Hallandale Beach Commissioner Keith London said the public deserved to hear about what is now a criminal investigation.
But I'm sure that most of you were appalled by the admission by Vice Mayor Julian.
But when he brought up the issue at a budget meeting Thursday, Mayor Joy Cooper, a political ally of Julian, banged her gavel and cut the mics.
By the admission by Vice Mayor Julian, that he had made a secret.
When the meeting reconvened, London again spoke about Julian, and Cooper ordered Police Chief Dwayne Flournoy to remove him from the dais.
I need the elected officials that are disrupting the meeting removed from the chambers, please. They need to be removed now.
Commissioner Michelle Lazaro recorded a heated exchange with Julian, who was eating rice and beans.
You're taking bribes. What are you kidding me?
You're taking bribes, and you got the to open your mouth and you accuse other people?
Yeah,
here it is right here.
Some nerve.
Here it is right here. You're taking bribes.
Stick a sock in it.
London voluntarily left the dais with the chief, and Lazaro was removed as well.
The mayor's protecting Bill Julian.
Cooper refused to go on camera today, but told me the commissioners clearly violated meeting rules. I have a meeting to run, she said. They have a right to speak, but they didn't have a right to speak at that time. It was not on our agenda. Lazaro said the Julian matter needs to be addressed immediately.
The most important story that's ever happened to the city is being ignored by the mayor.
In Hallandale Beach, Bob Norman, Local 10 News.
And back on the round table, we have some people here who've seen a lot, and all of us are going, What?
Whoa.
Where do we even start here? Rosemary, this is your sort of field. What should happen with Bill Julian? That people of Hallandale Beach want to know what is going on. What should happen with the vice mayor?
Well, first, it's remarkable. It's stunning that he was caught on tape. It's stunning that he agreed to do an interview where he basically sounded to me like that was him on the tape, and you know, he didn't really see anything wrong with it. I'm bothered that the mayor didn't seem to have a problem with it either. And this on top of, they also have these issues with the CRA and the spending, and there's an audit, a bad inspector general report on Hallandale CRA. And she's one of the people leading the cause for the new tax, so she doesn't have a problem with this. She doesn't seem to have an issue with the CRA, so you would trust her on the tax. But I'm glad to hear that the state attorney is investigating. My God, let's pull the curtain back and see what's happening in Hallandale Beach.
I got to apologize to Rosemary. Rosemary writes on the editorial side, on the opinion side, not on the news side. But I wrote a story on Friday about how the fact after Bob Norman's 2 reports back to back, the Sun Sentinel's editor and publisher had, according to all my sources in the newsroom and with whom they spoke, had ordered that this story not be covered by the Sun Sentinel. A story from the Sun Sentinel appeared on Wednesday and was pulled down.
Because?
This was because no one knows. But what we do know is that it was a story that should have been written and should have appeared Wednesday and was pulled from the website, and they did not cover it until Friday after they were shamed.
Do you know
the editor and publisher, Howard Saltz, owes an apology to the people of Broward County and the people of Hallandale Beach and an explanation as to why he did this. Because when a newspaper loses its ability to tell the truth, and when censorship allows corruption to occur, this stuff happens.
Pandora's box is officially open. Geez, Mark, over the top.
Over the top is censoring a story off of the web.
And I don't know that you have, I mean, sometimes anonymous people will say things, but I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence that our
Why did it get pulled down on Wednesday? Why did the story get pulled down?
I didn't see any evidence that the newspaper has said that this story will not be covered. In fact, I saw it covered. But I saw a well-researched, reported story in yesterday's paper.
2 days late.
If the story was not soup at the time that it was published, and again, I'm on a different side. If it wasn't ready, if an editor had a concern, they're within their rights that they want to know that they've got it nailed. But that story was in the paper yesterday and on our site, so I take offense at your saying that we don't cover the truth.
I understand you take offense at that. What I'm saying is when an editor and publisher goes out of his way to make this edict, this is what happens. And please understand that Bob Norman's report...
There's no evidence of any edict.
There is clear evidence that this Bob Norman's report appeared Wednesday. It had this guy on tape admitting that he was discussing trading his votes for goodies, and on Thursday he had a follow-up where the guy admitted that was his voice.
Can I just
say,
and
this still did not run, and that's wrong.
Bob Norman has been working on this story in everyone's defense for a long time, and he is the primary reporter who might know a lot of things that other reporters might not. But can we just get back to Marvin Dunn? This just goes to what every citizen fears, that their government is doing a pay-for-play shadow government, does it not?
It does, and we have a number of other corruption issues going on in our community, Opelika to speak of, as a matter of fact. There's just been too much of this, case after case after case, where public officials have corrupted the process of making informed decisions and fair decisions. And I think it also feeds into this whole right-wing movement in the country today that sort of tries to establish that there's no one to be trusted. They're all crooks. Throw them all out and be done with it.
And rarely is it on tape. You know, the one thing that I really didn't understand is this whole thing that the tape recording was a robocall that Bill Julian called to see what it was saying.
I didn't get that either.
Here's what happened. Bill Julian was attacked for his vote. And at the end of the robocall, it says, call back if you want to hear the message again. So he kept calling back, and then one time he forgot to hang up the call, and it turns out that if you stay on the line, it then records you. And that's what happened. I do want to say something. I think the Sun Sentinel is a great paper. I think you write great editorials. I think there was a bad leadership on behalf of the Sun Sentinel's leader, not on behalf of its writers, not on behalf of its editors, on this one man's part, and Howard Saltz needs to explain himself.
All right, I think next week we're going to invite Howard Saltz to come if he wants to defend his editorial
He hasn't replied to my emails, hasn't replied to my calls, or me on
maybe
Twitter. I'd love to hear what he has to say.
Let's see if
So
he responds to ours.
Shall we do a bonus round of the round table when we come back?
Stay with us.
Yet? Let's do it. Stay with us.
Yippee, we have a bonus round of Roundtable. We have a short segment here, and Rosemary O'Hara. I went Friday to Miami Beach. There was another Governor Scott Zika Preparedness Roundtable, and wherever there is Zika, and I'm glad the governor is being, aggressive here, but it's like a bottleneck. There is no Zika information unless he is there. Nobody else in the state. He will not allow them to talk about it.
Right. In fact, this week we called for Broward to have a Zika czar because nobody in Broward knows what's, where are we spraying, how are we dealing with it. But whenever there's news, the governor swoops in. Government responds in emergencies. In a hurricane, the governor wants to be at the microphone. This is the equivalent of a public health hurricane. Right. And by God, the governor wants to grab the microphone. The problem is having all the information come from here up there to Tallahassee and back is not the most efficient way to tell people what's going on.
And compounding that, there is this just finger-pointing, giant blame game. Marvin Dunn, you just said you think Congress may just punt until it takes care of itself?
By November, nature will solve the Zika problem for this season.
Why November?
The first cold snap will kill them off.
The mosquitoes will die.
The mosquitoes will die off, and then they can stall around for another 10 months.
That's a tough thing to tell
well,
a pregnant
Congress,
woman, right?
let's just say Congress goes back on September 6th. And the governor, I said, are you confident that Congress is going to pass some kind of a Zika funding bill? All he could say was, I'd be disappointed if they don't, but we all may be disappointed. All right, thank you all. Great roundtable, very lively. We'll see if we can get the Sun Sentinel publisher editor here next week, and he can give us his answer.
You want to come?
Sure, love to.
All right, up next, shedding some light on solar energy and the decision you're asked to make about it on the primary ballot. That's next. Good afternoon, South Florida. Live view at a Fort Lauderdale's tower cam. You can clearly see it's raining, and we're getting some showers, some heavy ones, in fact, across Broward County, not only entering Fort Lauderdale as we speak, but also up into areas of Coral Springs and Deerfield Beach. Davie also seeing some rain there, and then all the way South Keys are also seeing some heavy downpours, especially for you in the Upper Keys. You're about to get some heavy showers rolling through your area. This is, again, all thanks to disturbance notice at counterclockwise motion, and boy, it's been so windy. Hold on to your hats. Those winds are topping at 21 miles per hour in Miami, 20 in Homestead. Check out these wind gusts, gusting up to 29 miles per hour in Miami. So pretty much close to 30 mile per hour wind gusts out there, and temperatures warming up to the upper 80s for some of us. Right now it's 88 degrees in Miami, 90 in Pembroke Pines. If we get rain, these temperatures of course could drop, just as you see in Fort Lauderdale, and we expect the rain into this week. Jen, thanks. Despite the weather this weekend, this is still the Sunshine State, which is why it may surprise you that Florida is so far behind far less sunny states in using solar energy. A fraction of Florida residents and businesses, not even 1%, have solar power, and the savings that come with it on electricity bills. You can help move that needle by voting yes on Amendment 4. It's the only constitutional amendment question on the ballot this time. The language is legalese as usual, but very simply, Amendment 4 extends to businesses similar property tax exemptions that homeowners now get when they install panels and equipment needed to generate solar energy. It's another step forward for a solar industry in Florida. A no-brainer, really, a win-win-win for the environment, for the economy, and for the wallet. Amendment 4 is one of those rare ballot items that is supported across the political spectrum, from the tree huggers to the Tea Partiers, and most in between. The only sudden sort of hit-and-run opposition came from civil rights leader and cable pundit Al Sharpton. He called it a, quote, trickle-down economic dream. but couldn't really detail why when pressed to explain. Polls this week show big support for Amendment 4 when voters understand it, which can be a big problem in the voting booth because those 75-word ballot amendments aren't exactly clear and easy reading. And amendments need supermajority votes to pass, at least 60%. It is time for Florida to see the light, the sunlight, and actually use it. So what do you think? We invite you to weigh in on any topic you like.
You can reach us by email, Facebook, Twitter, any of those addresses. We are easy to find and like to hear from you. And remember, stay informed, get involved.
Have a great Sunday.